This is a short demo of the archive of the data management cockpit from Dolphin for HR. In HR, we have the problem that it's not easy to delete and archive information which are available in the PA transaction. The HR transaction PA30 can be used to review personal records. As you can see, here is an example of it, and we can see that there are certain info types. I can actually choose an info type and navigate into more detail to see essentially address information and so on and so forth. So all of these information are actually stored in PA tables, and we will basically show the process of the deletion and archiving. The DMC tool is configured from an archiving perspective, consistent with the ADK, and the transaction for the configuration of what tables will be used for archiving and deletion is AOBJ. So if I look into AOBJ, we have configured for this tool an archive object, and in this archive object, which is here the ARC1 HR1, we have all of the segments which actually correspond to the info types in the PA tables. So these are all of the tables which will be either archived or deleted, and we are very consistent with the archiving framework which SAP provides. So in order to have a traceable process, we actually have that two-step process. But let me just mention one more thing, is that we are not only looking into deleting data from the individual tables within the SAP system, but also attachments. So in this example, you actually see that we have an attachment here. Number one is the picture, which actually you can actually see the picture, the display. The pictures are essentially stored via the archive link interface, in this case here in the SAP database, but I also set up another attachment, which is the SAP Office attachment. In this case, as you can see, there is one test attachment, which is actually a PDF document. So after the deletion, we don't only expect to have the structured information being deleted, but also the unstructured, which is the picture and the PDF, which are attachments. So let's go through the process. The first step in the process would be to use the ILM processing transaction, DMC_ILM_HR. When I go in here, what I have to essentially do is to define where am I interested in deleting the data. And in this scenario, often the deletion depends on events. So events triggered deletion or archiving could be on something like termination or retirement, or let's say the death of a person. So these are the action types. It's the terminology SAP refers to find personal numbers. Of course, we can also limit based on date ranges, as well as if I already know specifically what the personal number is, I can specify that here. Number two is I also need to tell the system what business objects was used in order to store attachments. Typically in the SAP, we use the PREL business objects, but of course it could be multiple. So we have the option to have multiple business objects, which are then used to evaluate the link tables to the attachments. And the last few things, that's just performance and maximum businesses. So if I actually have, a selection which is relatively wide open, I make sure that I only have 10,000 being moved into what I call the catalog. So let's go actually and do a specific example. I have here this record. We don't run that open. We just want to focus on one example for now, which is Roy Baxter and his personal number. We use that for the restriction. So once I put that in, I run it. I see it's processed. As a consequence, there is essentially a second transaction, which is the catalog transaction. So my expectation now is that this record is now moved into the catalog. And again, we could restrict essentially based on personal number, but in this case, I just let it run wide open. And I see actually right now that this record was essentially moved into the catalog. And let me just actually look at some of the details again. What I have in so far is I have determined that there is a personal number, and there, based on the action type 10, I did do evaluate when the record should have been deleted, so a mandatory deletion date based on this criteria, based on our retention rule, should have been essentially May 2005, but we of course did not delete that yet. The rules of how long things should be kept are specified in a transaction AC_ARC1. If I go into this transaction, I can actually see that depending on, I can set up for HR different retention rules. And let me actually see if this is very restrictive. So different retention rules, 3 years, 6 months, 6 years. If I use the second tab, I see actually a little bit more specific what this actually means. So the 6-year retention rule applies to retirement, 3-year retention rule to termination, and 6 months could be if it's death or not hired, which translates to the action types, which I explained earlier. Action type 10 for termination, 14 for retirement, 41 for death, and 99 for not hired. So this is where we actually define the rules, and then the calculation is basically done based on that. Okay, so let's continue. What else do we know about this record? So we basically have learned that based on the rule of termination, which was relevant for the action type 10, we have a 3-year retention determined, but we also have these tabs in the catalog. Number one is we essentially see what kind of action was performed here. So we saw that we have an initialized originally, and then I was running a few times some reinitializations, but we also can look at the archive link attachment. So what we can see here is that all the details associated with attachments are found. So information like what is the type of the image, a JPEG image, where is the content repository, doc IDs, and so on and so forth, object type and object ID. So this is very good to know. And even here, you can, before I make a decision if something should be deleted or not, could actually look at the attachment by just clicking on the attachment button. So once I go in here, it goes out there and retrieves the image. In this case, it was just the photo associated with that person. And the SAP Office attachments are on that last tab. So if I click on this, I can actually, number one, see all of the metadata associated with this attachment, like what type it is, what the component name is. So these are attributes relevant for SAP Office storage, including the specific technical details, as well as when it was created and last changed, and so on and so forth. So not only I can see all the metadata, but I can also immediately launch the attachment to review it, and based on that information, I can go back in the first tab and decide if I either approve or disapprove the deletion. So if I go in and say approve, as a consequence, the status has changed, as you can see here now. If I go click in here one more time, I see now the workflow approval is approved, and that is a precondition for either the two scenarios, number one, archive, or number two, deletion. So let me just say, so we have actually done the approval. So I can actually go in here and see now that the approval timestamp is there. So now, since we have this record approved, let me just actually make this a little bit wider. And we still, have not done any of the either archiving or purging. As you can see here, these records, here's one which we had the archiving done, and in the log you see exactly what the archiving process was. And if I scroll, so it was initialized, approved, archived, and purged. So we have that traceability. It also tells you where it has been moved into which archive file. The other example here is the purge. If I click on here and look at the logging, I basically see initialization, approval, and purge, and it basically says purge with attachments. So I'm going to just go through that first example where we just perform the purge, which is not moving the data into an archive file, but just the purge straight in the database. So we're going through that process of purging, successfully deleting personal info. And so if I go into the logging again for Roy, I see the last step here was essentially the purge step, and it basically says purged with attachments. And now we're basically going back and try to prove that this is true by getting out of here and going back into the PA30 transaction to see if we find actually this record again. And as you can see, that record is essentially empty. I could also look for in the SE16N table for the PA, let's say 0002 record, and try to find it via the personal number, and there's nothing in the database. So that has cleanly been deleted, and that is essentially scenario, the first scenario where full traceability with the deletion in mind.